On this program, we speak a lot about the opioid crisis. It is an epidemic by any measure, and it's plaguing many of our communities. Well, last year, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, he promised hundreds of millions of dollars to fight addiction. But now questions are being raised about the money and that promise. Files One has been working on this story with our partners at the Journal News. Here is Ray Ramundi with his report.
You ask yourself, why me? How did I end up addicted?
It's a question Stephen Hill ponders till this very day. Now 6 years sober, he's sharing his story of opioid addiction and his incredible resiliency to overcome it and survive.
I know how lucky I am that I made it through and where I'm at today.
The journey has been a long one for the 27-year-old who revealed his addiction began at the age of 14. His drug of choice, OxyContin, a drug he says consumed his body. The need for it greater than the side effects of not having it.
I was in a hotel room throwing up. I couldn't even make it out of bed. Shooting pains up and down your body.
And now he started an organization called Speak Sobriety, where Hill shares his story of recovery and his fight to battle addiction. He's even penned a memoir about his struggle. But as Journal News health investigative reporter David Robinson highlights in his profile of Stephen Hill, Hill is one of thousands who have fallen into repeated relapse. Robinson and Hill attribute that to the limited 28-day recovery offered for detox in the state of New York.
It's really that kind of revolving door issue that a lot of the providers kind of describe it as you're in, you're out, you get clean for a little bit, but then that drug pulls you back.
The opioid epidemic have swallowed rural and suburban communities all across the lower Hudson Valley, including the one we're standing in. 91 Americans die each day as a result of opioid abuse. And here in the state of New York, the number of opioid-related deaths have doubled between 2010 and 2015.
I believe it is the worst drug scourge this nation has ever faced.
Governor Andrew Cuomo in April of 2017 pledging New York is far ahead when it comes to the war on opioids.
What we did in this budget is we basically doubled the state's commitment in terms of resources. And that's what the $200 million represents.
But there are serious questions about that funding to combat opioid addiction, according to a Journal News Albany Bureau investigation.
It was presented as additional funding, but when you look underneath the hood, it's actually reshuffled money that was existing.
That reshuffled money is centered around the State Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services, which monitors those funds. The investigation revealing the state is redirecting funds from other treatment programs. And according to its records, the budget for the agency only grew 1% between 2012 and 2018.
These are far insufficient amounts of money to fight something that is claiming hundreds, thousands of lives every year. So they're saying is that let's stop playing the politics and the budget gimmicks and start addressing this with the urgency that it needs.
The state says within the coming months it plans on opening an access center or urgent care center for addicts. There are already 400-plus beds that are in place, and the state says it also plans on providing an additional 130 treatment beds within this fiscal year. Steps all are hoping will end the ongoing war on opioids across this great empire state. In Westchester County, Ray Ramundi, Fios One News.
The full story by David Robinson, it is on lowhud.com as we speak, and it will be featured in Sunday's Journal News. Now, I sat down with Mr. Robinson yesterday. David, the story of Stephen Hill, unfortunately, God knows how many Stephen Hills there are out there. And I think finally as a nation, certainly as a region and a community, everyone's wrapped their arms around the reality of this. And I don't think denial is a part of it, but how to combat it, but also how to treat it. And I think the law is starting to say, are we going to be more in the punitive or are we going to be more in the rehabilitative safe? But if they choose the latter, as Stephen Hill articulates, it's not that easy just to say, okay, great, we're not going to punish. But if the treatment is the way it is right now, it's not really addressing at least the scope of the problem, right?
Yeah, I'd say Stephen Hill's a great example of that kind of revolving door kind of theme that you keep seeing from the providers, saying that, hey, I get into the inpatient detox, you get through the 14 days minimum, 28 days if you have some resources behind it, and then you're out, you're feeling better, you think you're better, and then that first hint of temptation, and before you know it, it's relapse, off to the races, and it's the spiral. And he fell so far that he found himself, living in New Jersey in an apartment, selling the drugs himself, and really it took a botched burglary, some people trying to steal his drugs, that got him into the criminal justice system and got him back into that final moment where he said, I have to make this work because I have nothing left.
Well, let's try and put some numbers to this. Here's a guy who had all the privileges and actually acknowledged there was a problem and went into rehab. As they say, that's one of the most critical steps, but he tried and failed so many times, even with funds behind them. So let's give an idea. Somebody in the throes of addiction, all different kinds of addiction, they go in for treatment. Assume in New York State, as you were explaining to me, they got to keep it for 14 days. If you've got funds here, you basically can stay for 28 days. But then after that, it's a little bit of a crapshoot how long you're going to stay there, right?
Definitely. I think for his personal story, he lays out actually that pickup after the fact. He actually went into the process of actually these types of facilities that allow for like an employment, like a transitional phase. And that's really where a lot of these people are falling down, is in that transition period where you've gone through it, you've gotten clean, you've gotten the drugs out of your system, but it's still in the back of your head. It's still changed the chemistry of your brain, so you're still going to fall to temptation because you haven't built the coping mechanisms. You haven't built the network around you of the people to call, the other people who are in recovery who you can lean on in those moments of temptation. So for his purposes, that transition period included a time when he worked for the facility that got him clean. And he'll even say, when he was working there with other workers, they came across a new resident who came in and tried to smuggle in heroin, and they found the heroin in the car, and their first thoughts were, let's just keep half of it and turn in half of it. We got to use it. As he put it, if he had a brain scan, his brain would have lit up like a Christmas tree because it was all these old triggers just firing off. And what he did was he luckily had the skills and the network built up at that point to say, I know what to do with those thoughts. I need to go call this person. I need to go do this thing. I need to keep myself from falling down that same rabbit hole. But really it took building that network, building that transition period.
And how many times did rehab not take before finally it did?
He was difficult to, he couldn't even count because he has inpatient detox. He breaks it down into the difference. I mean, he's talking dozens of times here. He's talking about, he had short-term inpatient detox, and then he would do that maybe 4 or 5 times, and then he would go to these kind of extended stay period, these extended stay treatment programs, 14, 28 days. He had a handful of those too. And really his final one, after failing so many times was that he went in for 28 days, to my understanding. He went into the transition period. 6 months he really started to feel like he actually had a handle on this, and he stayed there working for 2-year period, a full 2-year period from start to finish. He was there for 2 years, and that to his mind, and he's still in the throes of it.
But that's so telling to me. Right now, if you're lucky, you'll be at a facility for up to 28 days, and he's saying it's really 6 months to 2 years before you can really say, and you have that network, as you described, David, that you can have a fighting chance here to stay clean. And obviously this is what hundreds of thousands of people are dealing with, the vast majority without the resources, the support network that Stephen has. And good luck to him on his recovery. But part of this obviously is money, and part of this is the commitment with the respective states. To that end, I saw with a lot of fanfare, the governor said, okay, we found $200 million more. We're going to put to this program to help with the treatment. But you guys have dug deeper, and that's really, yes, it's $200 million, but it's more of a shell game. The money was already either in the system already or already earmarked. It was just taken from one to another, right?
Yeah, that's the problem, really. When you have people who have private resources, like Stephen Hills of this world, and his parents to a larger extent, they have the private resources. But then this is such a public problem that's where you have to lean on the state. You have to lean on the government and these public resources. So when there's political theater, when there's promises made of additional funding to actually meet the urgency of this, the providers, they said finally we're starting to get enough of a public response to this, so that it's not just the people who have the means to get through this. It's the Office of Alcoholism, Substance Abuse up in Albany, that is the state agency that handles all these dollars, and they have a roughly $600 million budget a year. But when you say you're going to have an influx of $200 million, that's a big jump. But when you look at it and it's not there, that makes it that much worse. The providers are saying, well, we had all these ideas of how we're going to use this money, how we're going to actually fill up all these beds, how we're going to help these people with those transitions. $200 million can do a pretty large chunk for doing some transitional housing.
Great reporting, as always, David. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Coming up next, the fatal school bus accident in New Jersey is making bus safety a big issue in our area as well as nationwide. After the break, you're going to hear from a local lawmaker with a plan to make buses safer for our kids.